The intruder theory still raises many questions. If someone were in their home, how could John and Patsy Ramsey not have heard anything from their bedroom while their daughter was dying a violent death?
A neighbor across the street reported hearing a fairly shocking child's cry between midnight and 2 a.m.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, what if John and Patsy also heard that scream? What if they were alerted between midnight and 2 a.m. on the morning after Christmas? Would that have been enough time to stage a crime scene and also to write a ransom note?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In the same way that the Ramsey ransom note pretends to be something it isn't, the entire intrigue around the Ramsey case, the mystery, the many things that don't seem to make sense, all of it is similar smoke and mirrors to the fake posturing and pageantry of the ransom note. In this analysis, I want to demonstrate just how quickly and easily the flimsy house of cards that this 28-year-old case has become can be solved. In other words, what I want to do is expose the flimsiness of the intruder theory all the way down to the DNA myth.
Worth playing for? Yeah.
Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, interesting, if you're learning things you've never learned before, hearing things you've never heard of before, please show your appreciation. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started.
Many have said, if that's the case, then why didn't John and Patsy Ramsey hear it as well?
And that's a very good question to ask.
Smith says he has an answer, and it has to do with the unusual design of the Ramsey home. He says the parents would have heard nothing because JonBenet was murdered all the way down in the basement.
In this analysis, instead of going down those all too familiar tropes, we're going to look at it from a completely different perspective. How could the Ramsey case have been solved in 5 minutes or less? Number one, tracking dogs. If tracking dogs had been brought to the scene, JonBenet would have been found inside the home within a few minutes. What the dogs would have confirmed right off the bat was that JonBenet never left the home, and further, she was still inside it. Now, it's interesting that John Ramsey complains endlessly about how incompetent the Boulder police were, and also, where was the FBI? Yet you never hear him complain about dogs, or even ask about them, or even think about them. Dogs, as we saw in the Madeleine McCann case, and Lacey Peterson, and Chris Watts, and Casey Anthony, are actually the obvious first tool law enforcement ought to use besides CCTV and security cameras in a case like this. Did you know there is actually a dog narrative surrounding the Ramsey case? The responding officers mentioned it in the first minutes at scene, and Detective Linda Arndt included it, this reference to dogs, in her first 34-page report. And here it is. Sergeant Reichenbach had informed us that the Boulder County Sheriff's Department Deputy Scott Williams was a K-9 officer. Deputy Williams was notified that his services may be needed, and he was placed on standby. Sergeant Reichenbach also suggested that if a bloodhound services were needed, Aurora Police Department might be able to assist. We find an expanded version of this narrative as early as page 16 in Lawrence Schiller's definitive Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. "Hey, what's the deal?" Haney finally asked. "There's been a kidnapping in Boulder," one agent said. That's FBI agent. "It's kind of hinky, crazy. There's something wrong with this one. The amount of the ransom is a really weird number." Then in the next paragraph, just before noon at Boulder Police Headquarters, Larry Mason suggested to Boulder Police Chief John Eller that they get tracking dogs. If this was an abduction, the kidnapper might still be close by. Then on the next page, I think it's page 17 of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, Mason wanted to use Yogi, a tracking dog from the city of Aurora. Eller wanted to use Boulder's German Shepherds, but the bolder dogs worked from ground scent, Mason protested, and they were easily distracted. The dog Mason wanted to use was a bloodhound that in 1993 had backtracked 9 miles to the base of Deer Creek Canyon and helped find a 5-year-old girl. That child had been driven part of the way and was the kind of trail that might stymie a ground tracking dog. The likelihood was that JonBenet had been taken in some kind of vehicle, and Yogi, Mason reminded Ella, was an air scent dog and could handle the situation better. You also had air scent dogs in the Lacey Peterson case. It's unfortunate that the bickering about dogs led to an impasse, but can you imagine if, after pointing to the 3-page ransom note on the floor, the cops had brought in the dogs and shortly afterwards found JonBenet in the basement? She's in the house and the parents are saying, but there's a note. What do you think would have happened next? Well, I think John and Patsy would have been taken in for questioning on the spot if she was found, let's say, at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and likely charged soon after. So you see, had the dogs been brought in, the case could have been solved in under 5 minutes, don't you think? Then there's also this from Detective Arndt's lengthy report.
Lou Smith showed me around the Ramseys' former home in Boulder, now owned by friends who want this story told. Smith says once on the case, he quickly discovered he couldn't believe everything he had heard or seen, like the footage that seemed to show no evidence of an intruder the night of the murder.
I even thought to myself, how could anyone get into the house without leaving some type of a footprint in the snow?
And then Lou goes on to say he looked at these photographs and saw, wow, there was no snow at all.
But then he saw the actual crime scene photographs taken the morning after the murder.
And then once we got the photographs, then you could see that there was no snow around the various doors and entry doors of the house.
Or the sidewalks.
Or on the sidewalks either. That's correct.
Because we've been here before. We're going in circles.
Yes, we have been here before, and it is a path well trodden. So how about we get off that path, get off this familiar trope, and look at something else? And so a question to be asked is, if Lou Smith had looked at the photographs, did he actually read the police report? Did he pay attention to it? I'm talking about the one from Detective Linda Arndt. And that brings us to number 2, no footprints in the frost. Most people who know the details of the Ramsey case know about a fixation on snow, no snow, but you never hear about frost. As I say, unless you read Detective Arndt's 34-page report. Let's have a look. Officer Weiss told me that there had been frost on the patio when officers had arrived. The frost had not been disturbed. Detective Patterson had entered JonBenet's bedroom. I walked into JonBenet's bedroom only as far as the first bed. I did not touch anything. Officer Weiss pointed out a bedroom located west of JonBenet's bedroom. I entered into this bedroom a few steps, but did not touch anything. Officer Weiss then walked east along the second-floor hallway into the children's playroom area. The important thing here, and it's so incredible, is that there's frost on the walkways, and not only that, we are told the frost had not been disturbed. In other words, there are no footprints in the frost. Besides all that, we have an officer identified making this observation. At last, we have a specific person, a specific officer, Boulder cop Barry Wise, identified as saying he observed no footprints on the frosted walkway. In his words, the frost had not been disturbed. Now, if you understand conduction, you know that solid substances like brick and paving, they can get colder when it's cold than, say, vegetative substances like grass. Conversely, if it warms, that would melt first because that would warm faster. And so, in a sense, it makes complete sense that by the time they started photographing the scene, that frost was long gone, and that created this perception that unfortunately took Lou Smith down a particular rabbit hole and ultimately into the basement rabbit hole through that grate, which led to the intruder rabbit hole. To repeat, if there was no footprints on or across any walkways, there can't be an intruder. That is solving the case in under half a minute. And that is right there in Linda Arndt's 34-page report. If you'd like me to go through it at some stage, page by page, let me know in the comments. And this is actually all old news, but if you've never seen it before, I'm guessing some folks have never heard of it before. How many are hearing this now for the first time? And that brings us to number 3, leaf debris not disturbed.
You notice, Katie, that this is an area that's real hidden from view. There's fences all around, and this is a perfect place to go in because nobody can see me.
It's quite an incredible statement from Lou Smith to say this is the perfect place to go in because nobody can see you. Well, there are 3 windows right above the grate, directly above the grate. There's also a doorway with a window in the door right there as well. And if you think about it logically, if this was a kidnapping and if the kidnapper meant to take a living JonBenet through this area, through this grate, through this window, I think he would have struggled. I think he would have struggled to take control of JonBenet, and he would have struggled to prevent her from screaming. And he would have been a sitting duck if she did scream at this point, because not only would they have been easily seen, it would have been so easy to take control, to apprehend them coming out through that grated section. I mean, you could come out the door right there and you'd have the perpetrator virtually on the ground already. And if you zoom out even further from the grate, you get a sense of just how many windows were looking in on that particular area. It really was one of the worst places for someone to go in to gain access. I mean, you could just as easily have opened a door, opened one of those many windows. Why would you want to go down through this difficult area? And then Lou Smith does a demo, but the problem is he does it in the middle of the day. He doesn't replicate the conditions, in other words, of snow and frost, which were early in the morning and late at night. And so what I want you to do is imagine that is taking place and just look at the debris where he's got to go down on hands and knees, and then once he's under the grate, he's got to go down on hands and knees again in that area that is full of dirt and leaves and packing foam.
This is a perfect place to go in because nobody can see me.
According to Smith, there are signs that someone had disturbed the leaves in the window well and of what he calls finger marks on one of the window panes, possibly from someone wearing a glove. He also points to what he believes to be a shoe scuff on the wall, and he says there are imprints of a high-tech brand boot, apparently not owned by any family member, in the wine cellar where JonBenet's body was found. And he says a suitcase placed under the window to help an intruder get out.
Wouldn't there have been footprints then on the suitcase?
Now, there are so many things to take note of. Him putting his hands on the dirt there, it does actually look like that area's been cleaned. There were a lot more leaves and winter-type debris at the time of the crime scene photos. It's not the same as when he arrived there in whenever it was, March or April. You can see his hips fill the entire length of that window as he comes through. So how could you have a spider web still remaining in that section? And of course, there's no mention of the one fingerprint that was found, which we dealt with in a previous analysis, John's fingerprint on the window frame. And that brings us to point number 3, leaf debris not disturbed. He says that there were signs that it was disturbed. Reinforcing the idea of no footprints in the frost, there are none in the desiccated, crunchy leaf debris surrounding the grate, as you can see in this Boulder police photo from the official files. None of that leaf debris you see there is transported into the basement either, not a single leaf or leaf fragment. Really, the intruder stepped onto a bed of leaves in the early morning, frost and snow all over, and managed not to transfer a single leaf into the basement, where he had to go onto his hands and knees not once but probably twice. There's a lot more to say about the above image. If you'd like me to analyze it, I can do that separately. But I want to end off briefly by dealing with the DNA myth.
How do you explain mystery DNA in her panties that also matches the DNA under her fingernails that belongs to a male individual who is not a member of her own family?
Who still believes DNA is the key to solving this case? Let's have a show of hands. Who agrees with what that reporter has just said? Did you know the DNA samples recovered from JonBenet's long johns come from at least 2 people, and so it's a composite sample? Did you know, just like the first district attorney who effectively exonerated the Ramseys, the second, Mary Lacey, didn't mention this fact, even though she'd been told when she'd cleared the Ramseys? And here's the article. Forensic experts who examined the results of DNA tests obtained exclusively by the 2 news organizations disputed former District Attorney Mary Lacey's conclusion that a DNA profile found in one place in JonBenet's underpants and 2 locations on her long johns was necessarily the killer's, which Lacey had asserted in clearing JonBenet's family of suspicion. Here's the pertinent part. In fact, those experts said the evidence showed that the DNA samples recovered from the long johns came from at least 2 people in addition to JonBenet, something Lacey's office was told according to documents obtained by 9 News and the Daily Camera, but she made no mention of it in clearing the Ramseys. The presence of a third person's genetic markers has never before been publicly revealed. Additionally, the independent experts raised the possibility that the original DNA sample recovered from JonBenet's underwear, long used to identify or exclude potential suspects, could be a composite and not that of a single individual.
You will not see what we're telling you tonight in the recent specials on TV or books in the true crime section of the bookstore. 9 Months Stone investigator Kevin Vaughn, along with the Boulder Daily Camera, have this exclusive and in-depth report that shows the DNA investigators have been relying on may not be the killer's DNA after all.
I'll put a link to that full video, DNA in Doubt, in the description, as well as the article, which you can read as well. As this article makes clear, if you're looking for an individual DNA sample using a composite, you're never going to find them. I find it interesting that the DNA ruse is a little like the ransom note ruse. Well, it's a ruse. It's also interesting how laser-focused John Ramsey is on this and virtually nothing else. Test the DNA, test the DNA. Why don't they test the DNA? Well, if you're looking for someone that doesn't exist, because actually it's several people, it's a sample, it's a composite sample, not of one, but numerous people, well, it's a problem. And that is according to Troy Ide, a former U.S. attorney for Colorado. Indeed. Any questions? I'm going to end off by playing a short little clip of Lawrence Schiller as he was interviewed in that little section dealing with Lou Smith's intruder theory. Listen to what he says.
There is no question that Mr. Smith's scenario, the way he puts his presentation together, is very, very powerful. It could sway a jury. It certainly did sway the grand jury that did not indict the Ramseys.
And it was due to statements like that made by an authoritative author. But look at when it was made, 2000. Within this context of being led to believe that the grand jury didn't indict, and that is why we are where we are 28 years later.
3.5 months after JonBenet's murder, Smith was called back into action by the Boulder County District Attorney's Office.
I thought it was going to be a slam dunk, Katie. I thought this was going to be an easy case.
If you weren't distracted by the misdirection, the staging, the smoke and mirrors, it would have been a slam dunk case if you'd focused on the essentials, the ones I've mentioned here: tracking dogs, no footprints in the frost, and leaf debris not disturbed. This case could have been solved in the first 5 minutes. Any questions? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.